Welcome back to the Piping Pastor. Today we'll be talking about the idea of hope built through perseverance and suffering by looking at the poetry of Herman Traube. Well, this afternoon I'm enjoying my favorite tobacco, my Desert Island Blend, uh, Seattle Pipe Club's Plum Pudding Bourbon Barrel Aged Reserve. I started out with some Maltese Falcon. Really wasn't hitting the spot. It's not a bad blend by any means, but it's kind of like early morning pipe, not burly morning pipe. It's kind of like early morning pipe in that it's a decent English, but there's nothing real punchy about it. Whereas this, yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that's it. That's what I needed. And I'm smoking in my Admiral pipe, my little Admiral pot here. And I had an interesting discussion at Muletown with Ethan, Parsimonious Piper, about his Pipe by Lee collection. And we talked about how he got into that because he found that there wasn't a whole lot in terms of like historical reference with regards to that pipe carver. And I said, same thing about this, because I have two of these Admiral pipes by this manufacturer, this carver Admiral or what have you. And it's a subcontractor, I guess you would say, of someone from a different English company, but they went out of business in 1907. But there's no real literature about this in the same way that there was no real historical references about, pipes by Lee. There's nothing here either. So he did a lot of research and talked to a lot of, people who have been in the pipe community for a long time to build his catalog and so forth. I don't think I'll go that far with it. But it would be interesting to know if any of you are familiar with this pipe. Now I know there are brands of Admiral pipes, but this is an Admiral pipe as in the manufacturer, the carver name. And it is different because it's written differently, and I've seen differences in some of the stuff that I've looked up. But hey, if anybody has any knowledge about them, let me know. Eventually we need to build some kind of historical reference point. So any historians out there looking for a PhD thesis? Pipe manufacturers. Well, I recently was finally able to watch the movie Tolkien. I don't get a whole lot of time for for movie watching, unfortunately. So my backlog of movies to watch is rather lengthy, and finally got to see Tolkien. So we're watching that with the kids, and it's a very well done film. They take some license with his history and so forth, especially while he's at Oxford. But generally speaking, they get everything pretty much right. And one of the things I was talking about with the girls was that you can tell that he's undergone some suffering, right? He was a World War I veteran, and he was in the trenches, and of course his family history and so on and so forth. He's gone through some tragedy. He's gone through some suffering, and it's reflective in his writing. You can see there's a depth to his writing because of that. Same thing with Lewis. And I say it isn't necessary that one undergoes suffering in order to be a good writer. There are people who, wonderful writers, who've had blessed lives, right? But the suffering that people go through, the perseverance that they exhibit during those difficult times of life, really comes out in their creative expression. Not just writing, any kind of artistic expression. And I was thinking about that when I was reading through this book of poetry I recently got by Herman Traube. He's a wonderful poet. He died in 2014, but he was a professor at the University of Maryland for a while, so relatively local to where I am. And he was a Holocaust survivor. The bilingual poet, so he wrote in both Hebrew and English. And many of his works have a real depth to them. You can see that in the writers in both poetry and prose who were Holocaust survivors. Viktor Frankl, of course, being the first one that just pops to mind. in Man's Search for Meaning, which is a wonderful book. What I was thinking about that when I was going through this book earlier, and this poem I think really brought that to the fore. This is called A Single Hair. Now it's a rather lengthy poem. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this one little section here I think is useful for the point that I'm trying to make today. And this poem is written from the perspective of a single hair, and it's a hair in part of a display at the Holocaust Museum. What the Nazis did after they would gas a bunch of the Jews in the camp and so forth, they would shave their heads and then use that hair to stuff mattresses and stuff for those surviving prisoners. And there's a display of that, and this is written from the perspective of a single hair in that display. People came here daily, like a zoo. Take pictures, eat ice cream, listen to guides, tapes. They never noticed me. For 32 years now, I have stuck to the glass with the hope that someone will pay attention to me. An individual hair. After all, I had a life of my own. You know, sir, I was such a silky, soft, glossy hair, often combed by a mother's tender hands, caressed by the boyfriend of the girl whose head I adorned. Even so, I was only one strand of many thousands. He found me among her braids, played with me, affectionately rolling me on his finger. Together we had so many dreams, hopes, visions, aspirations. The girl whose head I adorned, her mother, the man who loved us and me, were all taken to this place. We were sorted, separated by selections. Maybe you will see parts of us in the other displays, ashes for fertilizer in the show window. It's a gripping poem about the single hair, or the individual person, the individual who died in the Holocaust, because we're talking about multitudes who were killed in those death camps. And the idea of that each one, we can look at these mass graves and thousands, and we think what a tragedy and how horrible, but each one of those individual people had a story, had a life, had all these hopes and dreams and aspirations, people who loved them. And this poem really brings that out. It takes it from just a mass genocide horror to individual stories, which makes it a lot more deep, or a lot more impactful. And in that, there's something in that poem that gives us a perspective that we may not otherwise have had. And that reflection that came out of his suffering and his perseverance, in the same way that Tolkien and Lewis and Viktor Frankl. The Bible says that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. That trips a lot of people up. Some people get that backwards. They might think that you need hope in order to persevere. If you don't have hope, nothing to hope for, then there's no reason to persevere, right? That's not how the Bible says it works. Suffering is a part of life. It's just something that happens. Everyone has to undergo suffering at some point or another. But when we persevere through suffering, that builds character, and that character then produces hope, because it gives us perspective. Persevering through suffering and building character gives us perspective of what is the real and ultimate truth. It points us to God, and that is what gives us hope. 13 Pipes did a video just recently on being right and not letting people tell you what is right, and so on and so forth. I encourage you to check that video out if you haven't already. But what's interior to us, right? That perseverance, that character that we build through suffering, it doesn't produce everything in us, right? It doesn't produce the hope that just self-generated. It points us in a direction that we need to see where hope comes from. So it's not as if hope is just something we have. It's like some kind of goal or ideal. Hope is something we come to when we look to the source of hope, of true hope, of eternal hope, eternal truth, eternal righteousness. And the suffering that we go through, the perseverance that we develop, the character that we build, essentially puts us in a position to see that, and to see that more clearly. And the people who've undergone that, who have achieved that kind of hope, it's reflected in their creative expression. There's something shining and beautiful about that. That when they come through and they're able to produce these wonderful works of art, that hope that's in them is what produces that. Despair doesn't really produce art. Despair just drives you deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole. Now, of course, people point out, artists and writers and so forth who have struggled with depression and still made some really beautiful works of art and so forth. Yeah. But if they were absolutely in despair and completely hopeless, they wouldn't be trying to reach out and share what's inside them and share what they've gone through and share their struggle, right? They would just fade away. There's something in there that produces that kind of hope, that spark of hope that draws us on and makes us want to create these works, to share with other people. So hope's not something like it's like a Christmas ornament that we just pick up and say, okay, if I can hold on to this, I can get through anything. It's getting through the stuff that gets us there. Difficult concept sometimes, but that's kind of how we are created. We're difficult, complicated creatures, but we produce some beautiful things. Well, that is it for this time. I'm going to return to my Desert Island Blend here. Hope you have a lovely week. As always, happy reading.